share the what's going on in the microphone? Okay. So our panelists are here, so we're going to get started. So I'm Vicki Scarborough. I work for NSET 2 as a liaison person between the startups and the corporates. We're pleased today to be here at the Rayburn building and have our wonderful folks here, the students who've joined us, who've become our interns for the NSET program. A lot of other visitors as well. So without further ado, we're going to have a panel this morning on policy and bills for a startup nation, which is what we're trying to build. So that's great. Thank you guys for being here this morning. And without further ado, I think Stephen's going to kick it off.
Great. Thanks, Vicki. Well, good morning. I'm Stephen Ezel. I'm the Vice President of Global Innovation Policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. We're a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit, nonpartisan science, technology, and economic policy think tank. And we have, over the past several years, written extensively about the types of policies Congress and the administration can put in place to foster technology transfer, commercialization, innovation, and entrepreneurship across the U.S. economy. In particular, my colleague Scott Andes from Brookings and I issued a report last December called Localizing the Economic Impact of R&D Policy Proposals for the Trump Administration and Congress. This included 50 concrete policy recommendations about how we can build the institutional environment to support innovation in the United States, stimulate private sector innovation, promote technology transfer from universities and national labs to the private sector, etc. So I know Scott and I will have a few more words to say about that report. Also on Monday, ITIF released a new report called Tech Policy To-Do List 2017, which lays out a number of policies related to competitiveness, productivity, trade, innovation, tax, that we think would go a long way to stimulating the U.S. innovation economy. Let me introduce then our three panelists, and I'll have them maybe go in this order, then I can say a few more comments. But first this morning, we'll hear from Mr. Yan Zing. And Yan is with Senator Coons. He's a Congressional Economic Fellow. Yan previously worked at DARPA and was a technology consultant for Booz Allen Hamilton. As you probably know, Senator Coons has been one of the real leaders in Congress, particularly on the Senate side, in promoting policies for R&D and innovation. Senator Coons is the co-founder of the Senate Competitiveness Caucus, and for the Senator, Yan works in particular on R&D, manufacturing, innovation policy. Yan received his PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara in electrical engineering. After that, we'll hear from Mr. Graham Mason, who was the legislative director for Congressman Ben Ray Lujan, who represents the 3rd Congressional District of New Mexico, which, as you probably know, is home to Sandia National Labs in Los Alamos. Congressman Lujan is also esteemed for being the founder of the Bipartisan Technology Transfer Caucus, as well as the National Labs Caucus. And Graham holds an MP from George Washington University. Finally, we will hear from Scott Andes, nothing less than an eminence, I would say, in the tech transfer and innovation community. But Scott is a senior policy associate now at Brookings with the, say it, I won't get it right, the place-based.
Innovation and place space.
Innovation and place space. But Scott holds a master's in innovation policy from Carnegie Mellon University and had been with us at ITIF for a number of years before going off to CMU and then joining Brookings. So Scott, thanks for joining us this morning. With that, Jan, maybe I'll turn it over to you for 5 to 10 minutes of remarks, and we'll go from there. Thank you all.
Thanks, Stephen, for inviting me to the panel, and thank everyone for coming this morning to participate. So, as Stephen said, I'm in Senator Coons' office. I work on a range of issues in economic policy, specifically in innovation and manufacturing. I need to start off this morning. I think one thing that we want to make clear is perhaps the importance of funding to R&D and the linkages between that and then the applied world and manufacturing. So I'm going to try to make that clear in the next few minutes. There's a really neat report that came out from Harvard Business School a few weeks back by Kevin Yogi that looked at what is the linkage between R&D or federal funding and NIH and patents. So if we think of patents as a proxy for innovation and how we're doing, then the money that we invested in NIH, which is we do biology, health, research, then that should at some point lead to innovation, right? But in a sense, we don't do science for the sake of science. We really want to do science because it will eventually lead to better health outcomes for the population. And the patents would be a good way to show that we're commercializing those discoveries. And what we found is, not surprisingly, that yes, about 7-8% of the funding led to patents, which is great. But I think what's more interesting is that 30% of that funding actually led indirectly to patents. And really what it is that funding practice, funding lab space, funding indirect things that eventually led other companies to using a paper. Be like, hey, this is great. Maybe if we tweak it a little bit, we could patent this. So there are a lot of ways that federal funding actually goes into the innovation space that I think we need to be aware of. And that actually ties then to manufacturing. I think one thing that we do somewhat agree on, let's get real close here, with the current administration is the need to look at manufacturing and how that is going to keep us competitive in the global economic space. A lot of manufacturing has gone to overseas. I think that's something bipartisan and bicameral we all kind of agree that's been happening. What is not I don't think we've made a clear linkage is that R&D actually goes with manufacturing, not the other way around. There's been a lot of studies that show that if you have an R&D facility co-located with a manufacturing facility, your productivity and efficiency of R&D is 2x higher. So, basically, if you're doing R&D and the engineer doing the manufacturing is down the hall from you or just in the next building, you could walk down and say, hey, I've invented this new thing. I think it might help out. And then the engineer would be like, yeah, I'll put it on the production line tomorrow, and we'll see if that really works. So that synergy is really important for manufacturing and for our ability to actually make things. If we start to move all that manufacturing overseas, which we've done, eventually I think companies are going to say, look, I could place an R&D facility next to that manufacturing facility and get a lot more bang for my buck. And actually that's exactly what you've seen. The amount of R&D that's been going overseas has been increasing. One of the largest materials R&D, United Materials, Applied Materials, I'm sorry, they moved their facilities to China. So, because now solar panels are pretty much all made in China. And they require a lot of what's called the CVD chemical vapor deposition. That, it's a very refined process, and they have huge garage-sized panels that need to get this precise deposition, and this is what the company does. So they moved that to where the production is. So I think we need to make that clear that from the amount of money that we're spending does a lot of good things, from the R&D to creating companies. Those companies then need to produce in the United States that need support, and then we need to keep that here and make sure that the R&D for new innovation stays here. So with that said, what has the Senator done? We supported predominantly a lot of legislation in the small manufacturing space and R&D. So we've permanently increased the R&D tax credit for small businesses. A lot of those startups didn't qualify for R&D tax credit, which is in the past has been more for large companies. So we've kind of expanded the definition of what they are allowed to apply for. So now the startups can actually apply for that credit that allows them to innovate. Another thing we've been big on is the Manufacturing USA Institutes. So those are 14 institutes spread across the United States, based predominantly on a concept that the Germans are really good at. They're Fraunhofer Institutes, which looks at manufacturing and production needs and say, look, we need to have something on advanced materials. I think that's going to be a big thing. So they have an institute for that. Well, we do too now. Maybe we should do something on biopharmaceuticals, because that is a new thing that's, we have largely skyrocketing drug prices. Maybe we should figure out ways to make drugs more effectively and cheaply. Well, we do have that now. In fact, that facility just started this year, the only one by the Department of Commerce, and it is in the state of Delaware, which is Senator Cruz's home state. And it's a $250 million facility, institute, largely funded, more than 2-to-1 match from the private industry. So you're really seeing that the private industry is interested in being a part of these these movements to get more manufacturing and get more production to the United States. And I think a lot of because of this is going to be an internship for people on the Hill, and I think it's great to get young people on the Hill. Maybe I should just finish by saying that we're also big supporters of the I-Corps program. So if you guys haven't heard of the I-Corps program, it's an NSF program that helps train university professors and students on the entrepreneurial process. And it's a very successful program. We've actually had a bill that went to the competes that actually authorized that program and expanded that program to other agencies. And so, I think that that idea of supporting entrepreneurship and making sure that students and faculty get the help that they need to actually take that technology and figure out what are the tough questions that they weren't looking at, which is how do I get money? How do I do a business plan? What is the budgeting process, right? Like you've been thinking so hard on the how do you actually make this thing that the next step can be pretty daunting. And what we would hate to happen is that to be a barrier for just to say, well, I got this other NSF grant, I'm just going to work on that grant now and not worry about this and some other entrepreneur can take that. No, we want to make sure that you have everything you need so that you could make a good faith effort at trying to make new jobs in the United States and keep that innovation going. So maybe I'll finish with that and happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Hey everybody, can you all hear me? Is that close enough? Cool. So I'm Graham. I'm Congressman Von Rayburn Legislative Director. I'm going to admit at the top, this is not my normal beat. I normally like to supervise the guy who worked on this stuff, but my boss loves this stuff so much that we thought we should still send me. So as we kind of mentioned, my boss is the co-chair of the Congressional Tech Transfer Caucus. He's the co-chair of the National Lab Caucus, both of which are bipartisan. I'm going to start by kind of making 2 points that how I think my boss kind of thinks about these issues. The first is that innovation may have a national or even global impact, but like politics, the process is inherently local. Second, innovation does not happen in a vacuum. It requires physical, intellectual, and financial infrastructure. And if you think about we represent the northern half of New Mexico. If you think about that point, that's incredibly important to our constituents and our district. Because in some ways, New Mexico's innovation infrastructure is simply incredible. We have 2 national laboratories, Los Alamos and Sandia, both of which have contributed to some really cool technological advances beyond fulfilling an incredibly important national security mission. We also have some great research universities. But our state is also home to a persistent and incredibly difficult digital divide. 60% of New Mexicans living in rural communities and 80% living in tribal communities do not have access to high-speed internet. This digital divide creates an unacceptable opportunity gap that since affordable access to broadband has enabled innovators and entrepreneurs to take an idea, turn it into a product or a business, and connect those products to customers. Again, just think about if you don't have access to the basic internet infrastructure that we all take for granted, it's really, really hard to innovate or create a new business. So my boss has this line that he loves to say that I get tired of. It's a great line, that if you can have internet access on a plane at 30,000 feet, there is no reason you can't have it in rural and tribal America. So we may or may not do a big infrastructure package this year, who knows. Our office is pushing really, really hard for broadband to be a big piece of that. We're also working on draft legislation called the Broadband Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act to create low-interest financing opportunities for public-private partnerships, as well as state and local authorities to support broadband deployment. We have a big goal here, but it's our hope that in the not-too-distant future, we will be able to say that every New Mexico community, every New Mexico business, startup, and innovator or entrepreneur has access to high-speed internet service. The other thing, I think this is one of my favorite ideas that I've been on the Hill for 10 years. This is one of my favorite ideas that I'm working on it, because it's, again, not my project, but that I've been a part of, is building maker spaces in public libraries. Our kind of thinking is that the pockets of available innovation infrastructure and the places where new job creation is occurring don't always match up. So we think we need to think of creative ways to provide resources to innovators in every community across the country. So we believe that public libraries are the ideal location to build this community-level innovation infrastructure. They're accessible, they enjoy well-established ties to local communities and local businesses, and they're everywhere. So libraries are already doing this. So we're going to hopefully in the near future introduce legislation to kind of enhance those efforts, get them in more places so that people have access to the infrastructure that can help them develop an idea and hopefully bring it eventually to market. The other big project that I think we're working on is actually working on with Senator Kuhn's office. So we're pushing to create an independent foundation for the Department of Energy. The 17 Department of Energy laboratories conduct research and development in our nation's interest. Many of the technologies developed at DOE labs have been transferred to the private sector while making amazing contributions to our economy and our society. Other federal agencies, such as the National Institutes of Health, have established independent foundations to help develop private sector funding and partnerships in support of these agencies' missions. We want to give DOE the same authority. This will allow research to take place within DOE, in the government, at universities, or private sector organizations, and will provide a mechanism for private sector funding and partnerships to advance tech transfer, entrepreneurship, and regional economic development. I'm going to stop there and let other folks go. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks, guys. Welcome to Washington. My name's Scott Andes. As Stephen said, I work at the Brookings Institution. And so what I thought I'd do is first start with sort of our view of entrepreneurship as it unfolds around the country. We have a slightly different viewpoint, and then sort of march through where we think the federal government has a role and how that's changed and what that actually means for people interested in entrepreneurship. So I work on a team that realistically only about a third, maybe less of my time is actually spent on federal policy. Most of what I do is work in cities and states around the region, particularly with universities, on how they can build their own entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystems. So I work in cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Oklahoma City and others. So I see sort of federal investments as it comes to ground at your universities, at cities through accelerator programs and other entities that really use the funding and programming resources that come out of DC. So given that, I think we have a slightly different view on where the federal government can play an important role and also how that role has changed in the entrepreneurial ecosystem of late. So starting with universities, I think we would all agree that over the last probably decade, maybe a little longer, universities have begun to think about entrepreneurship in a fundamentally different way, and this has strong implications for students and faculty. So, frankly, entrepreneurship was never a major priority of most universities until about 15 years ago. And two things really sort of started to unfold. One is that funding from federal government, and particularly state governments, began to pull back from the university system. And at the same time, universities began to see some huge sort of tech transfer licensing and startup agreements. University of Chicago, Columbia University, other major universities were licensing drugs for hundreds of millions of dollars. And so this made the entire university system begin to think about their research a little differently. So originally the goal was to take federal funding dollars or endowment dollars and put it into academic publications. Now universities were beginning to see that if they take these same resources and applied it to research entrepreneurs and commercial applications of their research, they may actually be able to see financial windfalls. So this began to create incentives amongst universities to think differently about this. At the same time, we here in Washington, we tend to think that the federal government provides the lion's share of activity around the innovation economy. In reality, the state governments play the majority role in most university, at least ecosystem activities around accelerators, around seed funding, around other activities. So you have the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania created the Ben Franklin Institutes in the early 90s. You had the state of Oklahoma create I2E, essentially with an entrepreneurship organization that worked with all the universities. So states in the mid 80s and 90s were really beginning to ramp up their investment in entrepreneurship at universities. Well, over the last 10 years, and particularly in the last 5, that's really been rolled back. So you see substantial cuts across the country, not everywhere, but by and large across the country, not only for state universities for all their activities, but particularly these programs that have really been linchpins of entrepreneurship around the country for universities. So universities have really begun to sort of ramp up their own game. And in our opinion, and I think Stephen's as well, and some of the work that we've done, is as we see conversations here at the federal level, in our opinion, very worrying conversations about pulling back federal resources, we think in the conversations we're having with universities and their leadership, there's an increased interest for commercialization. One, to receive revenue from it, but two, it increases their competitive position. It increases their ability to attract students, such as yourself, who are interested in entrepreneurship, and it allows a new way of differentiating themselves from their competitors. So now it's not only about who can attract the right NIH grant, it's also about who's got the best reputation in terms of entrepreneurship. So all of this means that you're in a unique time if you want to be student entrepreneurs. On the one hand, state governments no longer have your back the way they did, frankly, at one time, and we'll see if the federal government does. Maybe I may be currently less cautiously optimistic than I once was, frankly, but we'll see. But there's a huge amount of interest at the local level, at the university level, at the city level. We're seeing city governments for the first time create venture funds in their own cities, which was unheard of a decade ago. You have universities like Drexel University creating multi-million-dollar seed funds for their own students. So there's a lot of opportunity now, but you may need to look in slightly different places. So I think from our report, that leads to a certain number of conclusions about what the federal government's role should be. And I would say it really is around 4 areas: funding, mentorship, university incentives, because the federal government is a massive funder, particularly in the life sciences, of universities, so they can incentivize a lot of activity. And 2, around corporate incentives that looks a little different. And I say the last one because I really think one of the major trends in startup activity we've seen is the interest in large corporations setting up their own internal venture funds, their own internal accelerators. And frankly, we're in early days, and they're not really that good at it, and they're extremely worried. Some of them are good at it, but they're extremely worried about keeping all their IP internal. And so I think there's a lot of ways for the federal government to help them think in more collaborative way around these investments that they're already making. So I'll tick off. I know Stephen's going to march through a lot of our policies, so I'll just tick off a few and then kick it over to Stephen. But around the funding side, the SBIR program in the United States is just a phenomenal program. It's one that's been adopted in different ways, shapes, and forms across the world. But we were really sort of the first to do it. It is a premier funding opportunity for research entrepreneurs. But as Stephen and I agree, and others may disagree, we do think that the commercialization element of that, and by that I mean not just creating a technology that's important to mission agencies, DoD, the Department of Energy, and others, but also allowing entrepreneurs such as yourself access to consultants who can help you find markets, to prototyping. That type of activity needs to be funded as well. 2, we really think that there are opportunities to better connect the national labs. Sandia and Los Alamos are a great example around entrepreneurship, but that requires more overhead for these guys. The reality is everything is clearly line item from Congress, and there's not a lot of flexibility, which makes when you walk in their door extremely difficult to find a point of connection. And also a program that is going well in New Mexico and should just be carbon copied around the country is an innovation voucher program. And this program essentially connects the national labs with young companies or small companies to help them solve technical problems. One of the major problems working with government entities is that there's long contracting periods and there's a lot of terms and conditions that you need to go to that just, they're difficult for startups and young companies to take the time to do that. The voucher program allows for an expedited process, so to speak, to help young companies solve problems. Mentorships, somebody mentioned Bladcore and ICOR. I think Steve did. We think the world of these programs. They're way too small. I mean, it's what are they at, like 5 million or something? I mean, that's pathetic. I mean, come on. Like, given the federal R&D infrastructure, the fact that we don't have a robust, extraordinary, 8 to 9 digit entrepreneurship pipeline from that R&D to the market by way of startup is just silly. So we need more of that. And then moving on to university incentives, really I think this is the sort of next step. We aren't doing enough to incentivize. I don't think we need to force universities to support entrepreneurship. I think what we should do is just provide the right incentives for those that want to and that have the right leadership class that actually have a pulse to think about these things. Provide incentives that they get credit for. So, one, we need much better entrepreneurship metrics. Right now, all of us up here, we use Autumn Data, which is a private data source for startup activity. It doesn't matter what that is. But the point is that this needs, just like NSF collects research and R&D dollars, we need fine-grained, high-value entrepreneurship data so we know what universities are doing as well. And then the other thing that the Obama administration did a good job at, that's totally nonpartisan, is that we need to really use the bully pulpit of the federal government to advocate for the organizations and institutions and universities that are doing this well already, and start to show how different models can be expanded. I'm doing some work in Pittsburgh, and Carnegie Mellon University is a leading engineering university for entrepreneurship based on the metrics and other activities, and they have a simple tech transfer agreement. I mean, they call it 5% go in peace, but essentially you start a business if you're a faculty or a researcher or a graduate student. You pay 5% to the university, and all the other terms and conditions are signed. It's easy. You go along your way. We could just package this and spread this across the country tomorrow. It's a legal agreement, right? It doesn't require cultural shifts or any of that. So really, I think these are the types of things the federal government can be good at. Let's take the best practices at your institutions and show the rest of the country how they're working. And then finally, just corporate incentives. Again, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. The innovation voucher is a good one. Tax policy, as Stephen I know will talk about, can play a big role. But the one that I wanted to mention, because we talked about manufacturing, I think one of the major missing pieces in our entrepreneurship ecosystem is connecting high-value research university-based startups that provide services to major manufacturers, so either urban universities or accelerators that have tons of intellectual or design credentials that can actually be applied to the manufacturing sector. There's a broken link here where we see a lot of service provisions and maker spaces and 3D printing and whatnot finding their way to the market by way of Etsy and other sort of online platforms, which is great. But from a technical perspective, I was just sitting with GE, and they said, it's amazing from a technical perspective. A lot of what these entrepreneurs are doing for Etsy and whatnot is similar to what we need, but there's no connective tissue between us and them. And so finding ways to link major manufacturers in suburbs and rural areas to urban universities, accelerators, and entrepreneurs, I think is a missed opportunity that would take a lot of work to do, and I think the federal government could be doing that. So that, turn it over to Steve.
Great. Thanks, Scott. So I'll just say a few words because this is your time, and I want to give y'all in the audience an opportunity to ask questions to policymakers up here and just generally have discussion and understand your needs. So I first wanted to just say a bit about our role at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation and how we play in this ecosystem. Because as a nonprofit, 501c3 educational institution, our mission is to put ideas and reports out into the universe that can stimulate ideas on the Hill. We kind of view ourselves as an organization that looks out around the world at best practices on these innovation issues and then these ideas to policymakers that they can then put in legislation. Also, maybe even to be a little bee around Capitol Hill, I hope that I've actually been able to put these two in touch, and they're now collaborating on this bill together on the DOE foundations. So as a connector, it's an important role for us. We completely agree with Scott that what this country continues to need to lead at is turning our universities into engines of entrepreneurship. I was up at Johns Hopkins the other day talking to Ian Tolfrey, who runs their Fast Forward, which is their tech incubator and accelerator. And he had a really interesting story. He said, I asked him, I said, how did you get this going at Hopkins? And they put about maybe 60 startups through the accelerator a year now. And he said, well, it's about 5 years ago. And we've been wanting to do this, but we couldn't get buy-in from the other university departments. And it was one thing when we'd have faculty come through and they'd ask us, what does Johns Hopkins have on hand to help us innovate and launch startups? And we didn't have a very good answer to it, and we lost the faculty we wanted to MIT or Caltech. That was one thing. But he said, when our students who were interviewing Hopkins would come to campus, and in their interviews were asking, what do you have us to help us innovate? And we didn't have an answer for that. And we were losing the best students and the best talent that we wanted. That's what got the attention of the English department, of the philosophy department, and every campus, every department of the university that will fund Fast Forward. So I think that's a good sign, and I think 20% of American universities today now have formal incubators or accelerators, and I think this will be, going forward, one of the biggest differentiators in America's innovation ecosystem vis-a-vis other countries, because we're really in the lead here, and it's through NCET and you guys that are spinning that. I was heartened on our panel yesterday to hear from Joel Creswell in Dan Lipinski's office, who was talking about reviving the Transfer Act, which was discussed in Congress in 2013. And what this act would do, among other things, is set aside 0.1% of extramural R&D budgets of federal agencies for expanding private-public partnerships at universities with commercialization capacity acceleration grants to bolster the competency and potential of American universities to support entrepreneurship. So I would hope this is something we can take up again in Congress to really provide funds that could be used for proof of concept efforts, conceptual validation, and the education of entrepreneurs at U.S. universities. I should say also that I want to thank you all in Congress for the success we had at the end of last year with two important bills, the American Innovation and Competitiveness Act, which you passed, as well as the DOE Labs Modernization and Technology Transfer Act. And of course, those are foundational components of America's innovation system. I do want to point out, though, that it will be important that Congress look at SBIR, SCPR again this year, because what happened at the end of last year was, quote, a clean reauthorization that expanded SBIR up to 2022. But it did not include a continuation of funding for a number of very important pilot programs that have been started since 2011. Things such as the NIH Reach Hubs, the Phase Zero proof of concept programs, the ability of non-NSF federal agencies to support the I-Corps program, that was not included in the authorization that was passed. So we're going to have an SBAR fix if the non-NSF agencies such as Commerce and Energy and NASA are going to be able to continue to have the I-Corps program going through. And that's got to be done by September of this year. Also continuing to increase the funding level for SBIR from 3.2%, so we're also offering capital in that kind of package. So I just want to say there, good progress over the past year. We appreciate that, but we need more going forward. Let me just close with one final set of thoughts. ITF releases a report every 2 years when a new data set from the OECD comes out that ranks the 39 OECD countries' levels of university R&D funding. And in this most recent study from 2 years ago, the U.S. is now 28 out of 39 countries in government funding for university research. So we did an event on Capitol Hill to present the report, and after I talked, somebody raised their question and said, yes, Mr. Ezel, how much does the federal government invest in R&D every year? I said, well, depending on the year, about $140 billion. And this person said, oh my God, are you serious? Our government wastes $140 billion a year funding R&D? And when you pair that with stuff you might see in the Trump budget, 20% cuts for NIH, 40% cuts at NOAA and EPA, 18% cuts at the Office of Science and Department of Energy, we in this community have a very important role to continue to play across this country to impress upon policymakers the fact that America's leadership in technology is based on our historically high levels of funding for scientific research. It's the investments that our forefathers and mothers did 30 years ago that are responsible for the jobs and industries and occupations we have in our economy today. It's incumbent upon this generation to pay it forward for future generations by making the sacrifices to invest in the future of technology and innovation in our country. So I would just encourage you to have that message when you're back at your universities and universities around the country. With that, why don't I stop and either ask my colleagues if they want to make any additional comments, and we can open up to your questions and remarks.
I think one comment about what Scott said, I think is important. The idea that we need to have this connective tissue between manufacturing and the workforce. Because when we think about all this tech innovation and entrepreneurship, to most people that really means software, right? That's a new app or something like that. But most of the economy is not run on that. Most of the economy is run on hardware. And we have a bill that part of the National Defense Reauthorization that's called Manufacturing Universities. So this is hopefully a $10 million program. We'll see what the appropriation comes out with. But the idea is that linking up with universities that traditionally do curriculum and workforce development in more traditional manufacturing industries, and then having them connect with companies like GE and the manufacturing institutes to actually create that connective tissue so that we have a pipeline of people who understand that there is a need for software. And when you're talking about how do you make sure a huge gas turbine works at 10,000 RPMs, right? So a lot of these things really is at the intersection of high-tech software, but also at advanced materials, also new ways of efficient production. So there really needs to be a better understanding from the students all the way to the industry and from the government that it's not we don't have separate silos of innovation. Right? Everything has to come together, and when those things come together, it spurs new innovation. So I want to make that.
I totally agree. I just want to add one point where one of the things that frustrates us when we go around and we interact with universities, and particularly student and graduate student entrepreneurs and to a lesser degree faculty entrepreneurs, is that those interested in entrepreneurship seem to think that the coolest thing you could ever do is create an app for Facebook, which in just my personal view, thinking about like how to actually change the world, is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. When you talk about finding a technical mechanism to help a heart pump work better for a major med tech company or something in our energy sector. I mean, these things are really, and again, just my opinion. If you don't work at Facebook, that's great. But that's really how you change the world. And the app economy will be there, and it's it's a wonderful improvement to our quality of life. But the fact that no less than 90% of the students I talk to who are computer scientists, engineers, or interested in entrepreneurship seem to think that that's what constitutes making a difference. It's I find a little difficult.
So let's open it up to our audience and our entrepreneurs and our students. I just want to ask, have y'all ever been exposed as entrepreneurs to the book, The 10 Types of Innovation, The Discipline of Building Breakthroughs by Larry Keeley? If y'all haven't read that book, as entrepreneurs, it's the best book I've ever read to walk entrepreneurs through the ideation process of new businesses. I commend that to you, as well as the book, The Business Model Generation by Osterwalder and Pigmuir. Really, really important literature for budding entrepreneurs to have exposure to. The first one was The 10 Types of Innovation, The Discipline of Building Market Breakthroughs by Larry Keeley. Really a fantastic book. Please. And just say who you were and.
How do you really get kids to understand that, like, a lot of kids want to get that kind of Facebook, Google, so on and so forth, to bring the ad or some type of service into that sector, or basically the fame and accolades and so on and so forth you want. So how do you get them to realize that innovation isn't so much about that, just more so like their own personal strategy, but you see innovation is more so about how to really affect the global economy or the global people. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question is for the young generation today. For them, it may seem that if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to be in the digital economy. You have to work at Apple or Facebook and make some digital app or some website. And how can we broaden this notion of innovation beyond just digital to other parts of the economy?
I think one aspect of it is Facebook and apps. The benefit they have is that it's just easy to get to, right? If you know how to program and don't know anything about gas turbines, want to learn about them, then creating an app is an easy thing to do. It's a low barrier to entry, and so I think part of that is the onus on companies, and I'm going to pick on GE because I think they've done a really interesting ad campaign. You've seen those ads that it's not there's a young hip guy trying to, telling his parents that working at GE is not about, with a wrench and everything, it's about software. I think to them, the companies, large tech companies understand that part of your question is how do we motivate people to not go to apps like Google or something, and see that there are opportunities in industry. So I think part of the onus is on companies to do that. Another part is on the federal government, so that's manufacturing university. So hopefully, younger entrepreneurs, when they go through university, if they're part affiliated with the program, can get an idea early on as they're thinking about what they should be doing and looking at, I'm really interested in energy, but I really don't know what are the big challenges technically in making better solar panels and making better wind turbines. I think there needs to be exposure from that end too, and that I think comes from the classroom, but also comes from our ability as a government to help be that connective tissue and making sure that industry and public and the public are connected. And I think also there's a cultural change too, and hopefully that maybe now the students here are going to have a better understanding that there are immense, and Scott was saying this, immense opportunities in health and energy that can really benefit from an entrepreneurial mindset. It's basically taking that leap and going into that.
I guess I'd also have to impress that modern manufacturing is no longer the dirty, dark, and dangerous of the past. Modern manufacturing is about developing cool new products, right? And actually, to do that, you have to use a lot of digital tools these days. You have to use high-performance computing, use cool computer-aided design, modeling, and simulation software. So whether you're designing the Oculus Rift or you're designing a cool new, Boeing 787, modern manufacturing is developing really attractive, cool, world-changing new products. Getting that message across at this point.
Yeah, so just two follow-on comments. I think, one, totally agree. I mean, the barriers to entry are just much lower in the app economy, but that's changing, right? I mean, I think as the obvious technologies of additive manufacturing, but using digital tools now to design and prototype, there is entry points to companies and quote-unquote traditional sectors for entrepreneurs such as yourself that didn't exist in the past, and I think that will help. I think also there needs to be more heroes. And entrepreneurship in these sectors tends to happen. Success is by way of an acquisition instead of an IPO, and that may seem like a small point, but I think you don't get to see the 23-year-old making $17 billion, right? And maybe that'll change, maybe it won't. I don't have any idea. But I think sort of highlighting what success looks like, and then I do think the federal government can do this. About 2 years ago, the Obama administration wanted to expand an inclusive entrepreneurship agenda, and I said you obviously need to do. And they just asked us, and I said, I think you obviously need to do it around people who have been disenfranchised from entrepreneurship, people of color and women. But what about sectors and places in the economy too? Like, why don't, while you're talking about inclusive entrepreneurship, you talk about entrepreneurs in manufacturing and energy and all these other, and retail? And that was not taken up. That was not an idea that they decided to run with. So I think, we can do some of this as well.
Go ahead first.
Quick comment on the question. I was going to we took part in ICOR. I'm very familiar with America. We took part in ICOR. We were very happy to see the majority of startups there were organizations something critical. As someone who's an app critic, and also as a startup critic, very good. My question is, my understanding is, I don't know what reason, was that R&D can completely demonstrate a good payback to this point. Like very simple, it's very clear. Why is there such a disconnect between that knowledge and the people making policy? Because it seems to me stupid to say, oh, we're wasting money on R&D, when R&D has a really good and comparatively quick payback. And what can we do about that?
You convinced us. I think this is a real fight. I think Stephen was making this point earlier about Trump's budget, and I think I try not to get in. I'm out of the predictions game at this point. I've been in politics for a decade, and I'm constantly wrong about everything. So, I think it's a missed opportunity, candidly. I think I don't think it's likely we're going to see something like Trump's budget, which devastates NIH and National Science Foundation and DOE and a bunch of other things, get signed into law. But what I guess keeps me up at night about this is that it's the Trump administration's negotiating position. And I think what we're going to likely see, and again, I'm not making a prediction, is stagnation on our investments in research and development, just because budget climate we're in and the administration posture. I think that's a real problem. I think that you guys coming up and doing policy internships is incredibly cool and important. And I think the only thing you can do is to continue to engage with members on how important these research dollars are. And I would also say that there is much greater bipartisan consensus on the importance of R&D than I think is often seen. But there are outside political forces, I think, that prevent us from making the necessary investments. There are plenty of moderate Republican or straight line Republican offices who would love to invest more in, say, NIH. We actually just did it. We just did 21st century cures last Congress, which my boss was pretty heavily involved in. So I think there is room for agreement. It's just sometimes you have to push back through the nonsense. God knows we're trying.
No, who's pushing against that?
You mean from the outside perspective? Some of these folks here are doing some great work on trying to educate members. It's tough. It's just these are tough fights. And I think one of the things that, obviously, we have something called the Budget Control Act, which is put sequestration, and has just really, really hindered our ability to make necessary investments in R&D and education and a whole bunch of things. That happened in 2011 in kind of a crazy circumstance that also still gives me nightmares to how all that went down. You just have to keep pushing and hope that we can eventually kind of make progress. It'll come, but one thing about politics is it takes a really, really long time.
So I heard this, a lab manager, one of the 17 DOE national labs, said this to me about your question. I thought it was really kind of terrifying, but insightful. He said, if I invest some of my resources and I work with a company from an R&D perspective, and that company is successful, the Democrats get mad at me because I've subsidized what companies should be doing on their own. And if I invest in this resource and the company is unsuccessful, then Republicans get really mad at me because I've now wasted public resources and there's nothing to show for it. And so you're talking about R&D as a unit. I kind of think of it as a portfolio. So yes, the overall number is bad and not getting better, but then also between applied and development and other parts of the portfolio of the federal R&D system, it's even more worrying, and I think it's getting worse on the applied and development side. And for some of these reasons, that I don't know. I actually think it's fairly complicated. The answer of why public investment in this particular area is absolutely necessary, and there's a lot of people who have sort of bumper sticker reasons why that's not the case.
Yeah, maybe one thing I'll add is I think the perception is actually very important, and it doesn't help that I think there's a recent report that came out that showed that companies around the world are sitting about a $1 trillion war chest, and I think that perception of a lot of companies, maybe Apple holding a lot of money overseas, that could be turned into IRA, internal R&D, and not making that investment. I think some of the arguments is that R&D, if it's going to benefit the company, they should do it, which is something we hear a lot. But there are also public goods, right? This is something that company or companies won't do because it's they view it as basic research, and that's something that the federal government should be coming in. So I think those are competing ideologies. But one thing I'll say is that I think reports have come out that said that we are not only bad at predicting politics, we're also really bad at predicting what is actually applied and basic. In that you think that, okay, applied research means that is going to get us a patent and get us a company, and basic research is not. And actually, in fact, we have no idea. There's actually a lot of cases where basic research has led to patents and major discoveries, and applied research has not, and vice versa. So there's an arbitrary distinction of what is applied and what is basic. And some conservatives say we don't do applied because that's going to be a business's case, and we would do basic. But the thing is that we can't make that distinction. There's really no proof that you can make the distinction and say that that is going to help the economy and innovation.
But in case you didn't see it, this gap is actually getting worse. A report from PricewaterhouseCoopers came out just Monday showing that last year China surpassed the United States for the first time in spending on later stage R&D, and that by 2018 China will invest twice as much as the United States, up to $658 billion on this critical late stage research. So we're starting to fall behind our global competitors on the applied side in a very serious way.
I feel like saying China did better.
Well, it certainly gets people's attention, doesn't it?
Just one comment from the corporate perspective. If you had a piece of intellectual property, when you filed a patent, you're a long way from a product. You look at the public, 4 or 5, 6 investments in us, assigned to what it's going to take to actually put that on the market, and you can only play some of the patent. There's a lot on that side. And, the side play of that is you have regulation that has to be in there. Especially in the device area has gone up in order of needs, which is really slowing us down. We're getting heavy to it.
Robert, I'm with New York City Health System, startup in South Dakota. You haven't touched much on regulatory issues associated with small business. It seems like a lot of regulation, business regulation, is geared towards large businesses and crush system. I'll give you an example. So in South Dakota, maybe in New Mexico, you have problems attracting talented employees. And so one of the ways to get around that is to offer employee stock ownership. Because somebody might be incentivized to really work for small companies that they need because they're going to get promotion along the way. But those regulations on crushing hundreds of thousands of dollars to establish that, the small businesses don't have that. You can't get around all those regulations. And so it seems like there ought to be a separate set of regulations for small entrepreneurial innovative businesses that allow them to do things like stock ownership, and even like the bank loans, a lot of the loan regulations that came down after the housing market crash really crushed small businesses. They didn't really do anything for housing. But anyway, I just thought, if you could comment on general regulatory type things we could do. How could we go about reducing regulation for small businesses?
So I agree with you. I think we have heard a lot of kind of issues with how small companies and large companies have to compete in the same sphere. and access to capital is one of them. I think that's one of the unfortunate repercussions of Dodd-Frank, is that there are regulations put onto banks that makes it harder for smaller banks who are more likely to loan to small businesses and local communities, but having to comply with some of the regulations, which were put in place because of the market crash that were intended to do good things, but kind of have an overarching effect. So I think taking those cases out and letting regulators know that this is causing an issue and having a voice, I think that's really important. A lot of times that's how you know that of these unintended consequences. I'll give you one example for other litigation would be cybersecurity. And so when I was in the DoD, we want to make sure everything, if we have a project that's going to be classified, you have to show that you have facilities that know that you can handle all classification levels. And now with cybersecurity being a big issue, there are new regulations for businesses to show that they have certain IT infrastructure that can handle cyber attacks. That's great if you're Northrop Grumman because that's what you do. Or Raytheon, or a lot of the large defense primes. That is not so good if you're a small business and you wanted to be a defense contractor. But they're saying now you have to, on top of all the other regulations, accounting that you have to do for the DoD, you now have to show that your IT infrastructure, who might just be one person, working part-time for you, making sure that you have emails and server set up, has to then comply with all these other things. So that can be very difficult, and I agree with you. And so what we're working on is there are manufacturing sensor programs, part of the Department of Commerce, and their job, they're in every single state, is to help manufacturers get the resources that they need to expand globally, to get the resources they need to just manufacture certain new things. And one thing we're working with them is figuring out what is the new kind of guidelines and best strategies to do cybersecurity. And we're working actually to make, this part of the MEP and Commerce Department, they're coming out with the whole guidelines. Look, you're a small business, we're going to help you comply with these and work with you on an individual case-by-case basis on how to make sure that you are set up and you have, this is a free resource, right? So this is one of the ways we can help make sure that we're safe and complying, but also making sure that the people who do need it, which are the small businesses, get the resources that they need. So where I'm happy to say that MEP program, as part of the competes, one of our bills was to actually expand that program and increase the money that they get, because I think they're doing great things, and they're the ones that actually have access, in the state, in every single state, to help companies, and we're happy that passed, and that's one of the ways that I think we're going to have to combat some of the hardships of the regulation.
Let me make a few comments to that. Maybe rambling, but might get somewhere. First, I saw John Cardinal from Senator Kristen Gillibrand's office here earlier, and I know they're working on new legislation to expand the ability of companies to use ESOPs. So expect leadership from her office on expanding ESOP in this Congress. And I tell you, we certainly agree with decreasing unnecessary regulations on the innovation economy. There was a great study done the other day that found that when you look at U.S. occupations in the U.S. economy, there are 600 occupations which are licensed by one of the 50 states, but there are only 60 occupations that are licensed by all 50 states. So we could do a lot more to decrease this unnecessary occupational licensing. A couple things that we're excited about. We do like the Trump administration's call that for every new piece of legislation or law or rule enacted, that two have to be brought off the books. So we force ourselves to bring efficiency and streamlining to the regulatory rulebook. If you don't know the REINS legislation which has been proposed, this is regulations in the need of executive scrutiny. I think I have that right? And that would essentially allow for a screen on any proposed rules that would have an impact of over $100 million in the U.S. economy. It's like the OIRA, the Office of OIRA is the Office of Innovation Review, and OMB would have some ability to look at federal regulations that could have large impacts on the U.S. economy. Finally, just let me say a piece of legislation that Congressman Randy Hultgren is working on that his colleague Andrew Meany told us about yesterday is expanding some of the elements of the R&D Efficiency Act for the national laboratories. Right now, the Secretary of Energy has to sign off on any tech transfer agreement from the national labs even if they're over $200,000. So what this legislation would do would give lab directors signature authority for tech transfer agreements under $1 million, and also find a way to streamline tech transfer agreements, because right now they take on average 60 to 90 days to negotiate with the labs, and they want to put one document in place to streamline that. As I understand, yeah, okay. Yeah, it was looked at the end of last year to be part of the competes. It wasn't included, and now they're trying to bring it back up in a new vehicle this year. Go ahead.
I did have a question for Scott. I think a lot of what everyone's touched on is mentorship programs, and I think you mentioned all in funding for any kind of mentorship program at the federal level is about $5 million. Would you say that? Would you say the quote?
I quote it was $30 million in total.
30.
That's what your legislation is called for, $30 million for.
Yeah, I think you mentioned you wanted to see it up to 8 to 9 figures. I guess I'm wondering what assuming I know I understand a lot of budgetary constraints, we touched on that, but assuming it could get that funding, what does that look like? Kind of filling in these gaps that you all have talked about.
Well, I mean, I think the I-4 and other programs just need to be ramped up a ton. I mean, every university should have one. These are working models. They seem to be. I haven't heard anyone criticize them. Oddly enough, people who want to defund them aren't criticizing them. They're just like, well, we got to cut, so why not? But it's very bizarre. So one, I think that's low-hanging fruit, assuming there's revenue. The other thing that I think that would be really valuable is to have the federal government play the role that state governments used to play in building accelerator models around cities and regions. And the one caveat, though, is the way that these rolled out sort of in generation 1.0 was that they all looked like, Tech Shop, and they all looked like CIC, and different economies obviously look different. So I think a amount of funding that would go to co-working, but more importantly, accelerator programs that have high-quality management teams as mentors that are funded by the federal government would go a long way. But again, tailored to regional economies from an economic development perspective. So I'll give you one quick example. There's a accelerator in Providence called Beta Spring, and it used to be a traditional for equity accelerator, and now it's moved to a revenue first model. So in other words, most of the economy around Providence is companies that are manufacturing, retail, high-end food services, where they need inventory, they need a number of other investments. So they need revenue first. They can't exist off of venture capital or traditional equity, private equity. So this is an accelerator that's specifically for companies looking for revenue, not venture funding. So it's not bizarre or unusual. It seems to make all the sense in the world, and they're just training a different breed of entrepreneurs. But having that across the country really makes a lot of sense. Pittsburgh's got something called Alpha Lab here because of their hardware space around manufacturing, so it's just a hardware accelerator. I think you're just doing these around the country would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think we can wrap up if you don't.
Sure. One final question.
Whoever asked the question about we kind of strayed from what we and I was wondering how to get student entrepreneurs to really be on tax adults. Because every 6 times they'll do whatever I've done is taxes and half. But so I kind of understand that. But on our campus, see what I think I'm seeing is that innovation is a good word. Entrepreneurship said, I think that there's a lot of work that we can do there to get people to think about enrichment in their respective disciplines instead of waiting for people to come. If you're a college student, it's accepted that he's kind of but let's make it better so that faculty support you.
I think Stevens, John Hopkins example is exactly what we're seeing around the country, where from the student, well, first there's some faculty interest, and now because there's such an interest among students and potential students, that it's a competitive advantage for universities. And so, actually, almost ironically, I've had conversations with accelerators and other sort of incubator groups that have been doing this in different cities, and they say, now universities are trying to do this. They're just rushing into the entrepreneurship game. They don't really know how to attract business capital and these types of things, but their students are demanding it, so they're setting up all these programs. So I mean, that's probably a good problem to have. But I do think the incentives are changing from the ground up at these institutions.
And I would add, I think a lot of universities already have capstone programs, an engineering program. I think that's a great way to bring the industry in and actually get real life problems in front of students. I'll also say that Scott mentioned the inclusiveness. I think that's really important when we talk about entrepreneurs and getting a diverse group of entrepreneurs. Words like entrepreneurship have been shown to be viewed differently in different communities. And I think that's exactly what you've been seeing. And so I think you get cognizant of that to attract women and predominantly underrepresented peoples in entrepreneurship, I think, or let's say innovation, or there's other ways we could be wording it and be sensitive to that. And that this is what we don't want is to have people with the same mindset going into this one field. We want to have a diverse set of ideas, and that really comes with being able to speak and be sensitive to everyone's kind of idea of what it is to start a business. And I think it's important. Actually, having a meeting with the Minority Business Development Agency this afternoon to talk about that, and figure out ways to help start up businesses and small businesses. Because what we're seeing in SBIRs is that everyone agrees it's a great program, except that women are not, the number of women owned small businesses hasn't been at the level that we think it should be at, and minority owned small businesses aren't at the level that they should be at. And so there's a lot of questions on why is that. So that trickles down into the innovation space before you even start a company. So these products and all that.
One of the comments I want to make about how to get around the app mindset is that for me, as an ex-corporate, I sponsored hackathons for my company, for Williams, around my problem. So I wasn't looking for apps, I was looking for this or that. So if you can get corporations to come in and sponsor the hackathon, as you say, pizza, that always works, brings them out, and a 24-hour hack or whatever it takes to solve problems for the company, that works very well, and you're not app focused necessarily. There may be an app or two in there, but really you're really looking for solving problems for the company. And that stimulates innovation at a very real level.
Yeah, and some universities have gone to really extreme models of that. So like the Olin College of Engineering outside Boston, 100% project-based learning, all team-based. All the projects are contributed by the companies, so the students are working on real-world, corporate problems from day one. And their Olin graduates start more new businesses per graduate than even MIT these days, and it's half women and minorities actually. So yeah, any way you can move beyond just the app to engage the needs of the companies, I think that'd be huge. All right, with that, want to wish you interns and fellows all the best in coming years in your time here on Capitol Hill. Consider us resources if you need in the future. And with that, thank you to our panel for great remarks.